Hello and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 250 Years of the United States of America. This is going to be an awesome week. We've got a lot of stories that I cannot wait to share. For today, our main stories are the Barbary Wars, the formation and initial classes held at West Point, an update on Washington D.C., and some continued fallout from the Judiciary Act from last year. Welcome to 1802 in America. It's New Year's Day in the United States of America, and we have a statement from the President, Thomas Jefferson. As Jefferson is, by modern standards, considered a deist who rejects state-imposed religion and interprets the Constitution as forbidding presidential religious proclamations, he issues no Thanksgiving Day proclamations during his presidency, a deviation from the precedent set by Washington and continued by John Adams. He gives his reasoning in a private letter on January 1st of this year to the Danbury Baptist Association of Connecticut. Gentlemen, the affectionate sentiments of esteem and approbation which you are so good as to express towards me, on behalf of the Danbury Baptist Association, give me the highest satisfaction. My duties dictate a faithful and zealous pursuit of the interests of my constituents, and in proportion as they are persuaded of my fidelity to those duties, the discharge of them becomes more and more pleasing. Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and God, that he owes account to none other than his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Adhering to this expression of the supreme will of the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience, I shall see with sincere satisfaction the progress of those sentiments which tend to restore to man all his natural rights, convinced he has no natural right in opposition to his social duties. I reciprocate your kind prayers for the protection and blessing of the common Father and Creator of man, and tender you for yourselves and your religious association assurances of my high respect and esteem. Thomas Jefferson, January 1st, 1802. Now, a popular criticism of Jefferson before the election of 1800 was that he was not sufficiently Christian. And to the Federalists, this letter would likely not have dispelled those suspicions. Still, the immortal phrase, a wall of separation between church and state, goes on to have an enduring influence, often cited in later Supreme Court cases as an interpretation of the First Amendment, though it itself is not written into law. On February 6th, Congress passes an act authorizing Jefferson to instruct naval commanders to seize Tripolitan goods and vessels, and while the Navy has recently been reestablished, there are not yet enough ships built to send an authoritative presence to the area, so they authorize the arming of merchant ships to ward off attacks. Despite the authorization, Jefferson is reportedly of the view that the time is nearing for negotiations. He is to be disappointed if that's the case. The squadrons sent last year to blockade the harbor of Tripoli have proven largely ineffective. Squadron Commander Commodore Richard Dale argues that the Navy's deep draft ships are unable to pursue Tripolitan corsairs along the coast and into the harbor. Commodore Richard Morris is appointed and is set to rendezvous with the Americans already deployed and take command, but his ship is damaged and needs repairs, and in the end, he'll make little effort to even try to enforce the blockade or stop the corsairs, and his poor performance will eventually lead to his dismissal from the Navy. On March 16th, President Jefferson signs legislation that officially establishes the United States Military Academy. This academy is the first military school in the United States and is founded by Congress for the purpose of formalizing the system of military education, training young men in the theory and practice of military science. This is sometimes also referred to as the United States First Engineering School, as the curriculum focuses on the building and implementation of fortifications, the building and construction of trenches, as well as the laying of artillery and creating maps and plans of attack. Now, as education is not ubiquitous, the cadets' first classes focus on mathematics and literacy. This new school is to be located at West Point, New York, from where it gets its commonly used name. The site is located on the high west bank of New York's Hudson River, and even by this point, in 1802, the site has a storied history. It was the site of a key fort built to protect the Hudson River Valley from British attacks during the Revolution, and it's where Benedict Arnold planned to aid the British and overthrow the United States in 1780. On Friday, we covered the Judiciary Act of 1801 and its controversial adoption. It was passed less than a month before the inauguration of Jefferson during Congress' lame duck session. Democratic Republicans supporting Jefferson almost immediately argued that the act was a cynical exercise designed to place Federalist sympathizers on the bench with a view of blunting the incoming government's policies. Although Jefferson will undoubtedly have his own judicial vacancies to fill in time, the large number of midnight appointments, as they came to be known, is clearly meant to dilute the influence of Jefferson's appointees. From what I gather, this isn't a grand conspiracy. The timing and swiftness of the appointments undoubtedly leads one to conclude that packing the court was the goal, but the appointees themselves were likely not in on the plan. Many Republicans in Congress vowed to remove the newly appointed judges from office by repealing the Judiciary Act, and in a legally untested claim, some Federalists argue that the repeal of the 1801 Act is unconstitutional because it will have the effect of removing Article 3 judges from office that they're holding during good behavior. The Judiciary Act is successfully repealed in March after much debating in Congress, the act being in effect for just over a year. It is, at least partially, replaced by a new Judiciary Act of 1802 in April that restores some of the parts of the former act that are deemed to be genuinely beneficial while canceling the reduction in size of the Supreme Court. The new act restructures the circuit courts into 6 circuits and assigns one Supreme Court justice to each circuit, though unlike the 1801 Act, no new circuit judgeships are created. This is separate from the ongoing legal battle between 4 judges who were appointed but not ever given their commissions, which will wrap that up next year. On April 6th, Congress repeals the excise tax on commodities such as whiskey, carriages, and other goods as part of the Jefferson administration's commitment to cutting taxes. The goal was laid out in his inaugural address from last year, where Jefferson said, "A wise and frugal government which shall restrain men from injuring one another shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned." Throughout the year, Jefferson secures major wins for the American people and industries when he is able to repeal nearly all internal federal taxes, focusing instead on tariffs, postal fees, fines for criminal behavior, and public land sales for funding the government that he's also in the process of reducing the size of. Some taxes are not repealed, such as taxes on homes and slaves, though they were allowed to lapse last year and are no longer paid. Just about a week after the repeal of excise taxes, the naturalization laws of 1798 are repealed as well. The required length of residency now reverts from 14 years back to 5. Alright, It's time for an update on the nation's new capital city, which has been operating for 2 years as the seat of federal power. In April, Thomas Jefferson restructures the commissioners tasked with developing the city, relieving some and streamlining the review process, appointing 3 commissioners who are to report to him directly. The development of Washington, D.C. requires a more structured administrative approach to advance construction and address ongoing challenges that it's facing. Thomas Monroe is appointed as the superintendent of the city of Washington and is now responsible for overseeing the general administration and financial management of the city's development. His role involves coordinating construction, managing budgets, and ensuring the city's infrastructure progresses efficiently. Nicholas King is appointed as the surveyor to manage the detailed mapping and land surveying necessary for the city's layout. His role is to ensure that L'Enfant's and Elcott's plan is implemented as accurately as possible while still translating the city plan into a practical development. One of the biggest complaints about L'Enfant's tenure was his stubbornness and perfectionism, leading to constant delays and clashes with local landowners. I even read in one instance he had a home torn down without permission because it was in the way of one of his roads. Benjamin Henry Latrobe is tasked with overseeing the design and construction of key public buildings, including the U.S. Capitol and other federal structures. Latrobe's being an expert architect helps advance not only a unified aesthetic, but also the creation of functional spaces in the new Capitol. By the end of April, the Enabling Act is passed, which leads us to our next story, that of the statehood of Ohio. It's April 30th when the Enabling Act of 1802 is passed in Congress and authorizes the creation of Ohio from the Northwest Territory, as well as sets a precedent for the creation of future states from the Western Territories. The act requires the people of Ohio to elect a delegate for each 1,200 residents to attend a constitutional convention, and they'll do so in Chillicothe later in the year. We'll catch back up with this story in November. On May 3rd, the city of Washington is officially granted a municipal government consisting of a mayor appointed by the President of the United States. But as those changes are in progress, we must take a moment to mention that President George Washington's devoted widow and the nation's First Lady, Martha Dandridge Custis Washington, dies at her Mount Vernon home on May 22nd of this year, at the age of 70. Back to the city that bears her husband's name, on June 3rd, Thomas Jefferson writes to a man by the name of Robert Brent, informing him of his intention to appoint Brent as mayor of the city. The Act of Congress incorporating the city of Washington has confided to the President of the United States the appointment of the mayor of the city. As the agency of that officer will be immediately requisite, I am desirous to avail the city of your services in it, if you will permit me to send you the commission. I will ask the favor of an answer to this proposition. Brent replies, accepting the appointment the same day, saying, I have had the honor of receiving your favor of this date, asking my acceptance of the appointment of mayor under the late Act of Congress for incorporating this city. Although I feel great diffidence in the talents I possess for executing that duty in a manner which may afford general satisfaction, yet feeling it a duty to contribute my feeble aid for the public service, I will venture upon its duties. I beg you, sir, to accept my thanks for the honor which you are about to confer on me, and for the obliging manner in which you have been pleased to communicate it. With Jefferson's new team of commissioners in place and a mayor for the city to oversee municipal functions, the city of Washington is poised for rapid growth. However, shortages of material continue to plague the construction of the city's most important buildings. Nearly all the iconic buildings that still stand today are built of a porous sandstone that is easy to cut and carve, but difficult to transport. The Aquia Creek sandstone that comes from a marshy area over 40 miles southwest of the capital is heavy and fragile. And being so far from established infrastructure, the roads that do exist to transport this material are poorly kept. Even once the sandstone is on site, timber is needed for scaffolding and framing and is again hard to source as the forests near the site have already been cut down, and importing timber from other regions is slow and expensive. Congress remains reluctant to provide steady funding, and often the choice is made to wait for the sufficient funding to hire skilled stonemasons and carpenters instead of relying on cheaper labor. Now, on the 17th of June, 3 Tripolitan ships with a combined strength of only 4 guns and 110 men encounter the Franklin under the command of Captain Andrew Morris near Cape Palos off the coast of Spain. The Tripolitans quickly board and capture the ship, taking it to Algiers. Captain Morris and his crew are taken prisoner. Before the year is out, Morris and his crew will be set free after the United States pays a ransom, though the Franklin and her cargo remain seized. The United States Military Academy opens in West Point, New York on July 4th of this year, meaning it'll celebrate its 224th year in operation at the time of this podcast's ending and on the date of our 250th anniversary in 2026. In October, Joseph Swift and Simeon Levy become the first graduates of the United States Military Academy. Levy graduates on the 12th, though an exact date is not available for Swift's graduation. Heading back to the Northwest Territory, on the 1st of November, Ohio's state convention, located in Chillicothe, petitions for admittance to the United States by approving the Ohio Constitution. When I was reading through it, it's pretty clear that it borrows much of its language from both the U.S. and state constitutions that are already in effect. Section 2 of its Bill of Rights is a notable deviation from the norm, however, when it says, "There shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in this state, otherwise than for the punishment of crimes whereof the party shall have been duly convicted. Nor shall any male person arrived at the age of 21 years, or female person arrived at the age of 18 years, be held to serve any person as a servant, under the pretense of indenture or otherwise, unless such person shall enter into such indenture while in a state of perfect freedom, and on a condition of a bona fide consideration, received or to be received, for their service, except as before accepted. Nor shall any indenture of any Negro or mulatto, hereafter made and executed out of the state, or if made in the state, where the term of service exceeds 1 year, be of the least validity, except those given in the case of apprenticeships." Thomas Worthington, a delegate of the convention, personally delivers the document to Washington, D.C., and presents it to Congress in December. As Congress won't take action on the matter until next year, we'll cover the formation of the state in a little bit more detail next time. On December 15th, Jefferson, being almost halfway through his first term, makes his State of the Union address, which we'll hear now.
To the Senate and House of Representatives, when we assemble together, fellow citizens, to consider the state of our beloved country, our just attentions are first drawn to those pleasing circumstances which mark the goodness of that being from whose favor they flow, and the large measure of thankfulness we owe for his bounty. Another year has come around and finds us still blessed with peace and friendship abroad, law, order, and religion at home, good affection and harmony with our Indian neighbors, our burdens lightened, yet our income sufficient for the public wants, and the produce of the year great beyond example. These, fellow citizens, are the circumstances under which we meet, and we remark with special satisfaction those which under the smiles of Providence result from the skill, industry, and order of our citizens, managing their own affairs in their own way and for their own use, unembarrassed by too much regulation, unoppressed by fiscal exactions. On the restoration of peace in Europe, that portion of the general carrying trade which had fallen to our share during the war was abridged by the returning competition of the belligerent powers. This was to be expected and was just, but in addition, we find some parts of Europe monopolizing discriminations, which in the form of duties tend effectually to prohibit the carrying thither of our own produce in our own vessels. From existing amities in a spirit of justice, it is hoped that friendly discussion will produce a fair and adequate reciprocity. But should false calculations of interest defeat our hope, it rests with the legislature to decide whether they will meet inequalities abroad with countervailing inequalities at home, or provide for the evil in any other way. It is with satisfaction I lay before you an act of the British Parliament anticipating this subject so far as to authorize a mutual abolition of the duties and countervailing duties permitted under the Treaty of 1794. It shows on their part a spirit of justice and friendly accommodation which it is our duty and our interest to cultivate with all nations. Whether this would produce a due equality in the navigation between the two countries is a subject for your consideration. Another circumstance which claims attention as directly affecting the very source of our navigation is the defect or the evasion of the law providing for the return of seamen, and particularly of those belonging to vessels sold abroad. Numbers of them, discharged in foreign ports, have been thrown on the hands of our consuls, who, to rescue them from the dangers into which their distresses might plunge them, and save them to their country, have found it necessary, in some cases, to return them at the public charge. The cession of the Spanish province of Louisiana to France, which took place in the course of the late war, will, if carried into effect, make a change in the aspect of our foreign relations, which will doubtless have just weight in any deliberations of the legislature connected with that subject. There was reason, not long since, to apprehend that the warfare in which we were engaged with Tripoli might be taken up by some other of the Barbary powers. A reinforcement, therefore, was immediately ordered to the vessels already there. Subsequent information, however, has removed these apprehensions for the present. To secure our commerce in that sea with the smallest force competent, we have supposed it best to watch strictly the harbor of Tripoli. Still, however, the shallowness of their coast and the want of smaller vessels on our part has permitted some cruisers to escape unobserved, and to one of these an American vessel unfortunately fell prey. The captain, one American seaman, and 2 others of color remain prisoners with them, unless exchanged under an agreement formerly made with the Bashaw, to whom, on the faith of that, some of his captive subjects had been restored. The convention with the state of Georgia has been ratified by their legislature, and a repurchase from the Creeks has been consequently made of a part of the Talaski country. In this purchase has also been comprehended a part of the lands within the fork of Oconee and Ocmulgee rivers. The particulars of this contract will be laid before Congress so soon as they shall be in a state for communication. In order to remove every ground of difference possible with our Indian neighbors, I have proceeded in the work of settling with them and marking the boundaries between us. That within the Choctaw Nation is fixed in one part, and will be through the whole within a short time. The country to which their title had been extinguished before the Revolution is sufficient to receive a very respectable population, which Congress will probably see the expedience of encouraging so soon as the limits shall be declared. We are to view this position as an outpost of the United States, surrounded by strong neighbors and distant from its support, and how far that monopoly which prevents population should here be guarded against, and actual habitation made a condition of the continuance of title, will be for your consideration. A prompt settlement, too, of all existing rights and claims within this territory presents itself as a preliminary operation. In the part of the Indiana Territory which includes Vincennes, the lines settled within the neighboring tribes fix the extinction of their title at a breadth of 24 leagues from east to west, and about the same length parallel with and including the Wabash. They have also ceded a tract of 4 miles square, including the salt springs near the mouth of that river. In the Department of Finance, it is with pleasure I inform you that the receipts of external duties for the last 12 months have exceeded those of any former year, and that the ration of increase has been also greater than usual. This has enabled us to answer all the regular exigencies of government, to pay from the Treasury within 1 year upwards of $8 million, principal and interest of the public debt, exclusive of upward of $1 million paid by the sale of bank stock, and making in the whole a reduction of nearly $5.5 million of principal, and to have now in the Treasury $4.5 million, which are in a course of application to the further discharge of debt and current demands. Experience, too, so far authorizes us to believe, if no extraordinary event supervenes, and the expenses which will be actually incurred shall not be greater than were contemplated by Congress at their last session, that we shall not be disappointed in the expectations then formed. But, nevertheless, as the effect of peace on the amount of duties is not yet fully ascertained, it is the more necessary to practice every useful economy, and to incur no expense which may be avoided without prejudice. The collection of the internal taxes having been completed in some of the states, the officers employed in it are of course out of commission. In others they will be so shortly, but in a few, where the arrangements for the direct tax had been retarded, it will be some time before the system is closed. It has not yet been thought necessary to employ the agent authorized by an act of the last session for transacting business in Europe relative to debts and loans. Nor have we used the power confided by the same act of prolonging the foreign debt by reloans and of redeeming instead thereof an equal sum of the domestic debt. Should, however, the difficulties of remittance on so large a scale render it necessary at any time, the power shall be executed, and the money thus employed abroad shall, in conformity with that law, be faithfully applied here in an equivalent extinction of domestic debt. When effects so salutary result from the plans you have already sanctioned, when merely by avoiding false objects of expense we are able, without a direct tax, without internal taxes, and without borrowing, to make large and effectual payments toward the discharge of our public debt and the emancipation of our posterity from that moral canker, it is an encouragement, fellow citizens, of the highest order, to proceed as we have begun in substituting economy for taxation, and in pursuing what is useful for a nation placed as we are, rather than what is practiced by others under different circumstances. And whensoever we are destined to meet events which shall call forth all the energies of our countrymen, we have the firmest reliance on those energies, and the comfort of leaving for calls like these the extraordinary resources of loans and internal taxes. In the meantime, by payments of the principal of our debt, we are liberating annually portions of the external taxes and forming from them a growing fund still further to lessen the necessity of recurring to extraordinary resources. The usual account of receipts and expenditures for the last year, with an estimate of the expenses of the ensuing one, will be laid before you by the Secretary of the Treasury. No change being deemed necessary in our military establishment, an estimate of its expenses for the ensuing year on its present footing, as also of the sums to be employed in fortifications and other objects within that department, has been prepared by the Secretary of War, and will make a part of the general estimates which will be presented to you. Considering that our regular troops are employed for local purposes and that the militia is our general reliance for great and sudden emergencies, you will doubtless think this institution worthy of a review, and give it those improvements of which you find it susceptible. Estimates for the Naval Department, prepared by the Secretary of the Navy for another year, will in like manner be communicated with the general estimates. A small force in the Mediterranean will still be necessary to restrain the Tripoline cruisers, and the uncertain tenure of peace with some other of the Barbary powers may eventually require that force to be augmented. The necessity of procuring some smaller vessels for that service will raise the estimate, but the difference in their maintenance will soon make it a measure of economy. Presuming it will be deemed expedient to expend annually a convenient sum toward providing the naval defense which our situation may require, I cannot but recommend that the first appropriations for that purpose may go to the saving what we already possess. No cares, no attentions can preserve vessels from rapid decay which lie in water and exposed to the sun. These decays require great and constant repairs, and will consume, if continued, a great portion of the moneys destined to naval purposes. To avoid this waste of our resources, it is proposed to add to our navy yard here a dock within which our present vessels may be laid up dry and under cover from the sun. Under these circumstances, experience proves that works of wood will remain scarcely at all affected by time. The great abundance of running water which this situation possesses, at heights far above the level of the tide, if employed as is practiced for lock navigation, furnishes the means for raising and laying up our vessels on a dry and sheltered bed. And should the measure be found useful here, similar depositories for laying up as well as for building and repairing vessels may hereafter be undertaken at other navy yards, offering the same means. The plans and estimates of the work, prepared by a person of skill and experience, will be presented to you without delay, and from this it will be seen that scarcely more than has been the cost of one vessel is necessary to save the whole, and that the annual sum to be employed toward its completion may be adapted to the views of the legislature as to naval expenditure. To cultivate peace and maintain commerce and navigation in all their lawful enterprises, to foster our fisheries as nurseries of navigation and for the nurture of man, and protect the manufactures adapted to our circumstances, to preserve the faith of the nation by an exact discharge of its debts and contracts, expend the public money with the same care and economy we would practice with our own, and impose on our citizens no unnecessary burdens, to keep in all things within the pale of our constitutional powers, and cherish the Federal Union as the only rock of safety, these, fellow citizens, are the landmarks by which we are to guide ourselves in all proceedings. By continuing to make these the rule of our action, we shall endear to our countrymen the true principles of their Constitution and promote a union of sentiment and of action equally auspicious to their happiness and safety. On my part, you may count on a cordial concurrence in every measure for the public good, and on all the information I possess which may enable you to discharge to advantage the high functions with which you are invested by your country.
I try to end on a positive or a cliffhanger when the history books allow, but this year we must end with the death of a signer of the Declaration as Francis Lewis passes away on December 31st. In reading of his life in more detail than I often present, I found it shocking how many times before that fateful day in 76 he brushed death and survived. Francis Lewis was born in 1713 in Cardiff, Wales. one of only 8 signers not born in the colonies. He was orphaned at the age of 5 and went on to live with his aunt, who saw to it that he studied in Scotland, where he learned Gaelic, and later attended the prestigious Westminster School in London. Upon graduation, Lewis worked as an apprentice at a London mercantile business, and when he turned 21, he inherited properties left by his father. He converted them to merchandise and sailed for New York City, arriving in either 34 or 35, and partnered with a man by the name of Edward Ansley. He involved himself in navigation and foreign trade, making several transatlantic trading trips, visiting northern European ports, St. Petersburg, northern Scotland, and Africa, and during his travels he twice survived shipwreck off the coast of Ireland. Lewis married the younger sister of his business partner, and with Elizabeth he had 7 children, 4 of whom died in infancy. Lewis' business supplied uniforms to the British during the French and Indian War, and he was working as a clothing contractor for the British at Fort Oswego in August of 56 when the fort was attacked. Lewis was reportedly standing next to the fort's commander, Colonel Mercy, when Mercy was killed in battle. Lewis was taken captive that night and began to learn the Indian language. He was able to appeal to the chief to be returned to his family, and the chief returned him to Montreal. The French, however, sent Lewis to France as a prisoner. He did eventually return to the colonies in a prisoner exchange in 63, and the British government granted him 5,000 acres of land in New York by way of compensation for the 7 years that he lost of his life. He retired from his business in 61 at the age of 52 and is estimated to be one of the 5 wealthiest men to sign the Declaration. It's after his retirement that he began engaging more and more in public and political affairs and became known as one of New York City's leading radicals. He attended the Stamp Act Congress in 65 and became a founding member of the Sons of Liberty. He attended the New York Provincial Convention and helped set up the colony's new government. Lewis was elected to be a representative in the First and Second Continental Congresses, and in 75 he signed the Olive Branch Petition. His financial experience and business talent made him a valued member of the committee on which he served in Congress, and the wealth that he had acquired was freely expended in the service of his country, procuring clothing such as felt hats, buckskin breeches, and coats for the Continental Army who desperately needed such items. Without clear instructions, Francis Lewis and the other members of the New York delegation were compelled to abstain from the votes for independence on July 2nd and the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, though both votes were carried by a unanimous vote of the other colonies, 12-0. Within just a few days, the New York delegation received authorization to join the other 12 colonies, and on August 2nd, Francis Lewis joined the other delegates of Congress and signed the Declaration of Independence. After the Battle of Brooklyn in August of 1776, British Captain Birch was sent with cavalry to destroy the Lewis home. After thoroughly pillaging the house, they took Elizabeth captive and threw her into prison without a bed or a change of clothing, and with only scant provisions. This was brought to the attention of General Washington, and he ordered the arrest of Mrs. Barron, the wife of the British Paymaster General, and Mrs. Kemp, the wife of the Attorney General of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. His goal was not simply retaliation. He made it known that his captives would receive the same treatment as Mrs. Lewis unless an exchange was made, which it promptly was. Although Lewis is reunited with his wife, her health was seriously impaired by her captivity and imprisonment. She joined Francis in Philadelphia in broken health and died in June of 79 with Francis at her side. During the winter at Valley Forge, Lewis was a strong supporter of George Washington when the Conway Cabal agitated to replace Washington with General Gates, and in November of 78, Francis Lewis signed the Articles of Confederation, one of just 16 of the Declaration signers to do so. In 1781, he retired entirely from public service. After the war, he served as vestryman of Trinity Church for 2 years, and after 21 years of retirement, at the age of 89, he passes away and is buried in an unmarked grave in the churchyard of Trinity Church. Well, that's it for 1802. Like I said, it's a little odd to leave it on a down note like that, but sometimes that's just the way that the history goes. Like I teased at the beginning, this week is going to be full of awesome events. We got the journey of Lewis and Clark coming up, the Zebulon Pike expedition, and an end, at least for now, to the Barbary Wars. This has been our story, 250 years of the United States of America, and as always, thanks for listening.